Welcome to State of the Net 2022. We're really glad to have you today for a great panel on kids, cashless apps, and COPPA, who's protecting kids' fintech privacy. This is an issue that's as prescient as ever, as everyone in the room knows. Screen time, usage of apps like these has really soared during the pandemic. With added screen time, we see additional interactions with different platforms and inevitably more business transactions that kids are engaging in. And so looking forward to having a discussion today about the laws that are on the books to protect kids as they're engaging in these transactions and engaging with fintech, and what more policymakers and private actors could be doing to protect children. And so I'm joined by a terrific panel of experts today that have been working on this issue all for a long time. We have Jamie Susskind, who is a tech policy advisor for Senator Marsha Blackburn, who is the ranking member on the Senate Commerce Consumer Protection Committee. She previously worked at the Consumer Technology Association and at the FCC. We have Jessica Rich, who is of counsel at the law firm Kelley, Dyre, and she previously served at the Federal Trade Commission in various roles, including Director of the Bureau of Consumer Protection. We have Sid Terry, who is the Chief of Staff to Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky, who chairs the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Consumer Protection Panel, and he previously served as her Legislative Director. And lastly, but not least, we have Rick Lane, CEO of Iggy Ventures. He previously served as Senior Vice President of Government Affairs at 21st Century Fox. So I wanted to kick off the discussion today by talking a little bit about what makes fintech and these issues around financial transactions distinct. And so I'm wondering, perhaps we can just go down the line, and I'd like to hear what you all think are distinct concerns, issues, challenges posed by fintech when it comes to children's privacy. So Jamie, would you like to start off?
Sure. First of all, thanks to State of the Net for having me today. I'm happy to join all these really great panelists. So I would say for anyone who's been following my boss since she started in the Senate, moved over from the House, she's talked about how consumer privacy is one of her, probably the biggest focus for her in the tech space. And also, for the past several years, she's been talking about the importance of kids' privacy and kids' safety online. And as we start thinking about this, we had occasion to start thinking a bit about the financial space and learning more about how kids are starting to use financial apps, things like Venmo. Kids are getting debit cards, which in and of itself, this doesn't seem like a problem. I have a daughter, she's going to be 5 soon, maybe when she hits about 12 is the time that I would start thinking, okay, I could teach her how to use a debit card, how to use, financial apps, so she can learn about sort of being, financially responsible, things like that. But at the same time, we started to think about how it seems like there's this gap there where the existing privacy laws that are out there don't really seem to cover or anticipate this issue, right? I mean, Gramm-Leach-Bliley seems to assume that you would be not a minor, right? It doesn't seem like you would ever think that a minor would be using something like a debit card or a credit card, or at least back then you probably wouldn't have thought about, them using financial apps. COPPA obviously exists, right? There's a consent regime, but at the same time, it's there and it's sort of like the bare bones notice and consent type stuff. But at the same time, it's like, it might not be anticipating sort of the wealth of financial information that, and other things, location data, things like that, that kids could be providing to these apps on a real-time basis. So, I think that this is a really interesting area in general, right? Kids' privacy is a really interesting area for us. So just happy to chat about it some more.
It's great to be here talking about kids' privacy and data, apps, etc. I think that there are a bunch of concerns that are raised by these tools. First, there is comprehensive data collection. It's not just your personal data, it's your financial transactions, it's your location data. The several laws apply. COPPA applies, GLB applies, but not comprehensively and not adequately. And one key area that's a gap is teens or tweens. And by the way, GLB and COPPA, the main laws that apply, were both passed in about 2000. I did the first rulemaking under COPPA, and my 24-year-old son had just been born. Kids, and this is true in other areas too, but kids are far more sophisticated about apps and the controls on them than their parents are. So these models that assume parents are going to control for their kids are very outdated. And the final thing I'll say is that to the extent that these laws are not adequate, part of that is that the way we have been approaching privacy with notice and choice is not adequate, because once people click through these annoying screens and pop-ups and say, yeah, sure, because they're not really focusing on what's going on. That's not their focus at the moment. They just want to use an app. Anything goes. Our notice and choice laws, that's basically what they do. So they don't provide, even when it's a very comprehensive and notice and choice, people are inclined to just click through, and it just really doesn't provide the protections that are needed.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks everyone for being here. And it's very humbling to be on this distinguished panel. I'll kind of go just build off a lot of what Jessica just said. You know, and actually what Jamie said too about the idea of getting people a debit card or for your kids or whatever. You know, I think in many ways that was, you know, having a teenager with a credit card or a debit card was sort of a high class problem in the past. You know, something that wealthier parents would be doing. But I think that in many ways, pandemic as well as the apps have made that a much more universal issue and have brought to the front the need that we have to really think critically and to step into this space. I'll sort of make a little bit broader comment beyond that. I mean, I think that one thing that, you know, we on the Democrats on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, particularly the Consumer Protection Subcommittee, pretty much feel universally that the idea that we more or less treat as adults, children 14 and up, is a fairly major flaw, especially with like kind of the, for lack of a better term, great power that the internet has. You know, I mean, the internet at this point where we stand now, as kind of Jessica noted, is both our past, present, and future, right? Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. But, you know, when I was 14, 15 years old, if I wanted to do something either good or bad, I had to go down to the computer in the basement at my parents' house. I had to dial up. I had to search for something and let it load. Usually I'd go do something else. It would take so long to load the page I wanted to do and then come back to it. I mean, again, again, the good and the bad is all at their fingertips now on their phones. So we really need to be thinking about that. But the other thing that I really think about in terms of this loophole is the way in which it can allow for targeting of kids and tweens, as Jessica noted. I think back, we had a hearing in September 2020 at which Tim Kendall, who was the first revenue officer at Facebook and later the head of Pinterest, spoke. And in my boss's testimony, there was a Vice article shortly before that where Facebook engineers said of the group algorithms feature were the quote unquote scariest feature of the platform, the darkest manifestation. A user enters into one group and Facebook essentially pigeonholes them into a lifestyle they can never get out of. Well, now that sounds hyperbolic, and it perhaps is, and who knows why that employee was talking to Vice in the first place. It's important to remember that they're talking about adults in that case. They're not talking about kids. And I think if we all think back to what we were like when we were 14 or 15, I think we have to really think about, you know, and think about this in terms of cigarettes. And that was what Tim Kendall did at that very hearing. Like, you know, we recognize that those years are habit forming and can be built and can shape you who you are for the rest of your life. And by allowing for companies who may not always have the best intentions, I know many of the ones all the ones that are here surely do, but who may not have the best intentions, to be able to target our children like that, I think is a huge oversight and something that needs rectifying quickly. And I'll leave it there.
And I just have to note that you look way too young to have used dial-up.
I feel really old because I remember having my son using dial-up and showing him how to use the internet. So that's really kind of scary in of itself. Now he works up on Capitol Hill. For me, when I left Fox, I wanted to do something good. And so I decided to volunteer my time to advise online child safety groups on tech policy. I felt 30 years of experience could help them, and they don't have the resources to compete with, the professional lobbyists in this town who are really good and really smart, but may have a different view on some of these tech policy issues. I worked on the FOSTA-SESTA legislation, working on Section 230 reform, Earn It Act, as well as the dark who is GDPR problem that's putting our national security at risk. I was approached about a year and a half ago by Rego, which is the company that is the parent company of the Missoula app. And they wanted to talk to me about this app that they were rolling out that helped protect kids' privacy. And we hear a lot of these companies that are out there. And once they explained to me what they were trying to do, here I'm supposed to be a child privacy advocate and expert, and I had never thought of the simple fact that when I got my kids' credit cards, that I didn't opt out of anything, that they had been tracked since the age of 14 all the way now through adulthood with every credit card purchase they've made with their social security numbers, their name, their date of birth, everything to create a dossier. And then this light bulb went on and said, imagine once that financial transactions get combined with your social networking history. You have a dossier on kids before they hit 18 that is second to none and nothing that we have ever seen or foreseen as we were looking at COPPA and GLBA. So when Rego was showing me their tech, I was like, oh my gosh, a technological solution that solves a public policy problem. And one of the people I reached out to was Jessica. Like, have you thought about this? Like, we're kind of in the same world. When I was doing MySpace, Jessica and I would have conversations all the time. How do we protect kids on MySpace? Never thinking, oh, what about their financial transactions? So working with members in the House and the Senate and others, one of the things I'm real excited about this event is to really bring this issue to the forefront, because it's not an issue that we really have spoken about since the 98 passage of COPPA and the 99 passage of GLBA.
I realized a couple minutes ago that I never introduced myself. I'm Cristiano Lima, technology reporter with the Washington Post. I write our Tech 202 newsletter. First live event in a couple years, folks. So I wanted to turn, and Jessica, you alluded to this, but you mentioned that you think there are gaps in the existing laws, and you mentioned the cutoffs, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what you see as existing gaps in COPPA, and then also Graham Leach-Bliley and other standards that we have around this.
Well, I think it's important to understand first what does exist, because I think there's a lot of confusion around that. So maybe could I just start with that? So I think the main laws that apply in this space, and I'm talking US and I'm talking commercial, is COPPA, which is parental consent for the collection, use, of disclosure of information for kids under 13. Then there's GLB, which allows people to opt out of third-party sharing, but not with affiliates, which is a big loophole. And that would apply to all people, including kids. So there's an overlap there. There's also the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair and deceptive practices and provides the FTC with a lot of flexibility to protect kids even outside of those sectoral laws. And then there are state laws, and one in particular, California adds a consent for third-party sharing with 13 to 16, and a lot of other state laws in the pipeline that may address kids. And then, of course, there are proposals like Jamie's boss's recent proposal for minors. But it's very important to know that COPPA does, it's certainly not up to the task today, but it does have a lot of protections that parents can use if they're paying attention. It applies to this space. Not only can the FTC enforce it, but all the banking regulators can enforce it, because the FTC lacks jurisdiction over banks, but it does allow the banking regulators to also enforce it. But it applies to these apps. It applies not only to the apps themselves, but to third parties that collect information through these apps. It has notice on the website and directly to parents, alerting parents that data collection may be going on. It's got parental consent requirements that have some teeth, but also have some flaws because, for example, using a credit card is considered a form of parental consent. So if a parent doesn't want a kid to just use their credit card to say, my parent consented, they're going to need to be paying attention. And, you know, I don't want to go on too long, but, parents can get access to data that's collected about their kids. And then, as I said, GLB also provides some tools. So the reason this is inadequate is it's fundamentally based on the notice and choice model, which if you're not paying attention, you just run right through it, and then it's a free-for-all. And it doesn't, COPPA doesn't extend to teens or tweens. So we do need new laws, and I guess that's my summary of it for now.
And if I could just jump in and say, and then channel 100% my boss here, but I mean, one of the things that my big takeaway from your really helpful run through there, Jessica, was that the burden is on parents in this case, yes. Right? And so well-educated, often well-to-do parents are going to be able to protect their children, but many others are not going to have that opportunity, nor even know that they're missing that opportunity, right? And that's where I think that's kind of what the paradigm shift has to take place in our laws, right?
To the extent that parents have access to the internet and sophistication about the tools, they can do this regardless of income. But many lower income parents both don't have the time because they're working double jobs, and they may not have access to these tools.
Can I also?
Yeah.
I think all those points are right. So my boss, along with Senator Blumenthal, who chairs the Consumer Protection Subcommittee, they held 5 hearings over the last year, bringing in a lot of the big players in this space. They brought in YouTube, they brought in TikTok, they brought in Instagram, they brought in Facebook, which I guess is now Meta. We brought in Snapchat. So they've had everybody up there. They had the Facebook whistleblower, and basically what we've seen is that regardless of COPPA, it seems like a lot of these companies are either willfully or perhaps, I guess, negligently disregarding COPPA, right? I mean, we saw a lot of documents that showed that Facebook was actively recruiting kids under 13 to the platform using siblings to do it. And so it seems like, I'm a Republican, right? I mean, my boss is a Republican. We're not looking to create a nanny state, but it's very tough for parents to be working in sort of a good faith way when the companies are not. And it seems like, me as a parent, right? And I work in this space, right? I feel like I'm knowledgeable in this space, but even I probably would miss things that sort of an everyday parent, living in the Midwest would never even think to look for, particularly when these companies are trying to actively flout, the rules in COPPA now. So that's why my boss and Senator Blumenthal recently introduced a bill. I would say that we should not necessarily get rid of COPPA, but at the same time, I acknowledge, as Jessica says, that when it comes to kids and, what do we call it, tween safety, that there definitely is a major gap here and that there's more that needs to happen. There's parental safety features that, can be put on by default. There's safety audits that can be taking place. There's age verifications that they need to frankly do a better job of doing. I recognize that some of these companies will say, hey, we're doing the best that we can and we can't help it if kids lie. But if nothing else, it's like you're trying to collect the age data based on the data that you already collect. You should be setting things more. I mean, we saw that, for example, Instagram said that kids and teens profiles should automatically be defaulted to private. And then we saw that actually wasn't happening. It's things like that we need to be thinking about. In addition to COPPA, I mean, certainly the Hill is talking about whether COPPA works, whether COPPA should be updated, but there's more than that needs to be happening. And like I said, we're not looking to create a nanny state, but we also recognize that parents are, in a way, like they're working at odds with companies that are, able to pull one over on them, frankly, and that parents are stressed. It's been a pandemic. Parents are working. Kids are at home. They're just trying to figure out what to do. And so, we think that there's more that needs to be done to protect kids' safety online here.
So you mentioned that you think that there are companies that are flaunting the standards on the book. So putting a pin in the potential changes to the laws that exist. I mean, how much of the issue here is enforcement and the extent to which, I mean, we've heard from kid safety advocates for years that they wish that COPPA and these standards would be more rigorously enforced. So how much of that do you think is part of the issue?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously Jessica spent many years at FTC, but I do think that there's more enforcement that needs to happen. I don't happen to agree that the answer is getting rid of the safe harbors in COPPA. She may have a different view, but I do think that it would be nice to see more enforcement. But at the same time, when we have, Facebook coming up there and saying, well, we just removed 800,000 underage accounts. Like, how do you get 800,000 underage accounts on your platform in the first place? So, we need to be really thinking about sort of the protections that are in place on the front end so we don't have to rely on the FTC in every case to be, enforcing against 800,000 accounts.
If I can just add.
I see you gearing up over there. Go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things about COPPA that I would early on, always was a strong supporter of is the self-regulatory regime of having these secondary entities that are certified by the Federal Trade Commission to help in this enforcement side. I do think that could be stepped up and there can be greater scrutiny of the self-regulatory regimes that are out there. We're very proud at Missoula and Rigo that we are COPPA certified. We took that very seriously. We built privacy from the ground up, working with Prevo and others to make sure that we had the regimes in place, and that's very helpful for parents. I always looked at that as sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval so that you wouldn't have to worry about the 800,000 companies that are out there and hoping and crossing your fingers are doing the right thing, that there was a mechanism that could help guide parents but also hold these companies accountable. So I hope that stays in place. The other thing I just want to make sure is that the digital wallets and debit cards are a good thing. The fintech world, as we heard from Congressman McCall, it can be pluses and minuses, just like digital currencies and Bitcoin and all the other issues that are out there. We just need to make sure we have it in place. But one of the positive things as we're heading into the Financial Literacy Month is that there's a lot of great products that fintech can be helpful on and to help kids learn how to manage money, to get chores, to donate to charities, and a few other functionalities that Missoula and other digital financial apps do. But at the same time, you don't want all that information collected on these kids of what they're doing and their financial literacy. So providing tools to help kids in this cashless society and learn about financial literacy is critically important. The question here is, what are the rules of the road in this fintech world to protect kids' privacy and their financial privacy?
Yeah, I just want to note for especially the press here that we, the Energy and Commerce Committee, led by Congresswoman Castor, who's kind of our lead along with Ms. Trahan, Ms. Rice, and Ms. Dingle on kids issues, conducted oversight on all these third-party companies, and I believe we have all of our responses back from them. If any of them are here or watching and you haven't gotten it back, this is me guilting you. But so I think that we're going to be, we're kind of evaluating this space right now. And if there are other people here who have insights and we have not reached out to you, we'd welcome those at this time.
So
can I make a point about something that is particularly challenging in this area is knowing when you are dealing with a kid. And COPPA may be too porous in that it's kid-directed sites, and then if you're a kid-directed site, you're covered, or if you're a site that has actual knowledge you're dealing with a kid. So your bill deals with it differently. It provides protections when the covered entities, when somebody's reasonably likely to be, when the site is reasonably likely to be used by a minor, or when the entity that owns the site, that operates the site or the app, reasonably believes they're dealing with a minor. Those are difficult standards too. And so for all you researchers out there, I think getting this right is going to require that knowledge standard, that standard for when you're responsible, when you know you're dealing with a kid, to be adjusted properly, so we get the proper coverage. It's a very challenging area.
Yeah, so I'd love to dig into some of the proposals that you all referenced. Obviously, both the House Energy and Commerce Committee and the Senate Commerce Committee have been very active on this. Sid, I know you all are holding a hearing around, tech accountability tomorrow. I'm wondering if you could talk about how you all see this particular piece around kids' privacy, fintech fitting into your agenda there.
Well, we're still reviewing the Blumenthal-Blackburn proposal. That being said, when you have Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn coming together, it gets a lot of attention. And so we're reviewing it really, really closely. That being said, again, I mentioned Ms. Castor and kind of the other members who she's working with. They have a proposal out there that we Democrats like a lot. I think our minority counterparts aren't as enthralled with it, but I could be wrong. But either way, I think we see this as being a key part of a comprehensive privacy bill. We're looking to kind of, it was announced in November that we made a proffer to the minority there on that. The base text for that would be, at this point, the Castor bill from our perspective, but obviously we expect that to be negotiated. And we'll see where it goes. But, and our message to everybody here would be that we view the Blumenthal-Blackburn bill as a live issue, and our hope would be that we could use that as a springboard to a comprehensive privacy bill. But again, I don't think we're going to hold it up or wait for that either.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and Jamie, maybe if you want to speak to this, there have been questions for a long time about whether lawmakers should move ahead on this idea of a comprehensive privacy bill, move ahead on a more distinct proposal that's focused on updating COPPA. It seems that Sid, you think that maybe it should be rolled into that comprehensive proposal, but Jamie, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not at liberty to share the discussions my boss is having with other members, but she has said publicly, right, like, let's get them all done. I don't think she views this bill as a substitute for comprehensive consumer privacy. She thinks, she would tell you, she's on TV all the time talking about it, right? That is, I think, one of the most important things that she thinks that Congress needs to get done as soon as possible. Obviously, this is also a really top priority, but I don't think that changes her calculus about the importance of consumer privacy. So, I think if I were channeling her, she'd say, well, let's get it all done.
And so I want to dig into a couple of the specific aspects of legislation that you all have mentioned. The age cutoffs in COPPA. There are a number of different standards across CCPA in California, GDPR, the UK's age-appropriate design code that all would potentially boost or have boosted protections for not just children, but also tweens, teens to an extent. I'm wondering if you all could speak to which protections you think should be, if at all, to be expanded beyond the current federal U.S. standards, and which ones you think should be kept in place. And that's for anyone. Yeah, go ahead.
So my personal view is that we should start at age 17 and under. That I think, as a parent has gone through it, I thought when I was 17 I knew everything. It's just typical being 17. But they're going to make mistakes, and you don't want them making life-altering mistakes, as I like to say. So I think it should be 17 and younger, but I understand that compromises need to be made, and it looks like there's a consensus around 16. And if we can get really secure protections at that age, again, compromise is the name of the game in this town if you want to get legislation through, especially in the privacy area. But I also am concerned about, I love Venmo. I use it all the time. I think it's great. I don't understand why people allow others to see their transactions. That just baffles the heck out of me. I'm looking at my phone and my Venmo, and people are saying what they gave their kids money for and their friends. I don't get that, but they want to do that. That is their right. But when they're 17 and under, that is a little more troubling because that's open data. That's the data that can be scraped. That's the data that can be used by others who are not even part, as we've seen with Facebook and other social networking sites where they're scraped. that information can be used for somebody who's younger, who thinks they know everything and who cares, because I'm 17, I'm going to be 17 forever. So I think those are some of the areas that we need to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I'll sound a bit like a broken record. I think that our official position at this point is the Castor bill, which I believe takes it up to 17. And I think that we'd also want to take a hard look at the issues that are being raised here as well. But again, I sound like I said, like broken record. Blackburn Blumenthal has definitely got a lot of attention.
A chief element of any bill needs to be that it's enforceable. And I do see in the UK code and even the bill that you guys have, the Blumenthal Blackburn bill, some elements that would be very difficult to enforce that I think there needs to be meat on the bones. For example, a general duty of care, it will be very hard for any agency to enforce. And so there needs to be a little more fleshing out of what that means. I do think there need to be some special controls for tweens or whatever we're calling them, but more work needs to be done on what happens if both the tweens and the parents try to implement those controls at the same time. And otherwise there's this terrible battle and the tweens are going to win. At least in my house. And I do strongly believe, I don't have a view on 16 or 17, but that the 13 to 16 should have some special protections.
We've alluded to the UK's age-appropriate design code. There was recently legislation introduced in California that basically seeks to export some of those protections and create a framework that mirrors that in the US context. But more broadly, I'm wondering if you think that is an approach, and again, I'll open this up to anyone, that other states should be looking to emulate, or what, if anything, we should be taking from other standards on this featured in GDPR or CCPA?
No states, don't do it. Jessica and I had a conversation right before this panel about whether our bill had intended to preempt states. I mean, I think that's probably the clear intent. We just, I think in our view, we didn't need to put the language in, but, perhaps we do need to put the language in. I think that it's, no, not right now, not today. But yeah, I think it would get very messy, particularly given the way that companies are structured. And maybe that's just me, belying my Republican preemption, right? But we need not for states to do this.
And let me broaden this out a little bit. If there are aspects of those proposals that you think should also feature in a federal bill.
So let me just reiterate that I do believe the UK code would be difficult to just to take straight to enforcement, because it's written like a best practices document, and as a former longtime enforcer, I would have a hard time using that to go to court. But you could combine an approach like the UK code with safe harbors where groups could put meat on the bones, could interpret that kind of code specific to particular industries, and then people who enter those safe harbors who are willing to be part of those programs would make pledges to comply with those more specific standards, which would then be enforceable and more specific.
So I want to turn a little bit to, we've talked a lot about the regulatory side. I'm wondering, I want to talk a little bit about what private actors, companies could be doing to boost children's privacy around fintech financial transactions. I'd love to go down the line and hear if you all can think of an example of a company in the private sector that you think is taking some positive steps to address some of these issues, and that you think other companies should potentially be emulating. Or if anyone, whoever wants to jump in.
Well, I know that when my kids were tweens, we used a payment card that had limited features. So there was only, I think it was a credit union. No, it was USAA, not that I'm trying to advertise for anyone, but, it didn't track them in a comprehensive way. There was only so much they could do with the cards, but they were able to pay for things and they could deal with it in an emergency. So that seems like a very basic way to approach, not that I'm sure we would want to legislate that, but there could be options for parents so that they don't sign kids up for a data collection machine.
It's actually hard for me to say of a company that's doing a good job. I know Rick has flagged his company. That I just heard about them fairly recently. But I would just, as an anecdote, one of our staffers was an engineer at a big tech company, social media company, who did GDPR implementation. And they told me and our whole office basically that the company basically made a blank announcement that they did not have any users under 13, and therefore they did not have to worry about COPPA. And that's,
they had no actual knowledge. Yeah.
Correct. And I think that's a lot what Jamie was kind of talking about earlier. And so, given the size and power of the company that she came from, that suggests to me that's a common industry practice. So I'm not really. I think we really ought to be more trying to press them on this issue instead of praising anybody at this point.
So I'm a little biased here, obviously, working with Missoula and knowing what they have done in this space. This is a commercial for them, though. But the ability of building privacy from the ground up and ensuring the protection of kids is what you should be looking for. I think, I protect my own personal name brand with a lot of effort to ensure that, when I'm working with an entity or groups that people know that I truly believe in what those companies are doing. And working closely with Missoula, I know that their hearts and their minds are in the right place. When they started this company was actually started in 2008. When they began looking at this issue way before the pandemic. The technology has been in development those years, and now I always look, it's a very old, it's like the old saying, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success. And I think Missoula and Rigo is in that space right now. And again, when they came to me and looking what they did, it's all the things that we always talk about from a policy standpoint of what companies need to do. And Rigo, Missoula, with their Missoula Pay button, which is like an Apple Pay button or a Google, Android or Google Pay button on sites and all these things. It's what companies should be doing, and we're trying to become the standard that other companies are trying to reach.
So I won't list a company. In part, it probably wouldn't be appropriate for me to, but number one, the example you cited was on the show Silicon Valley for anyone who watched that. So it's real and it tracks. But I would say, right, as a matter of principles, we should be thinking about things like data minimization for kids, limiting the data transfers for kids, right? A lot of the companies, I will throw TikTok under the bus because my boss would let me throw TikTok under the bus. But if you read their privacy policy, that's scary. They're collecting a lot of things that probably you all as adults would not want collected on you. Also query what they do with it, but that's a lot of things, and our kids are on it, and our kids are pretty much addicted to it, kids in the US, and that's a lot of information that I'm not comfortable with, having collected on kids and teens.
So we're actually coming up on time, and I do want to give a chance for the audience to ask any questions. Duncan over here, in just a minute, I want to ask just one more question to the panel, but if after this question's done, if you'd like to raise your hand to ask a question to our panelists, we'll run out a mic to you. Just the last question from me. Humor me and say that you were made omnipotent ruler of all things privacy for a day. In the U.S., what would be the single most significant change you think could be made, whether it's something private sector companies could be doing, something regulators should be doing, or a change to existing standards? What would be the most impactful?
Oh, my Lord. 22 years I've been involved in monitoring congressional actions on privacy. In 2000, I was the manager that was responsible for a report to Congress calling on Congress to pass comprehensive privacy legislation. 22 years of hearings and bills, et cetera. We need that so badly. The mess that we have today is in large part due to Congress's, it's not you personally, failure to act all these years. And so we need a comprehensive approach.
I agree.
I'll go really quickly. I think that a ban on cross-app tracking and a opt-in consent model would be the most impactful things.
I mean, being a public policy person and having worked on all these years on the privacy issue in general, I mean, let's face it, there's two major hurdles that Congress has to overcome: federal preemption and private right of action. Those are the hurdles. And unless we come to some type of agreement, which we did just in the Can Spam Act, I always thought that was it shows you how old I am because I worked on the Can Spam Act. But it was a model that I thought could work. The other thing I think, if I was able to implement legislation, is the ability, making it illegal, except for in certain circumstances, to re-anonymize data. I think that's also a big loophole because you can take, quote, anonymous data and re-anonymize it. We saw that with research that was done when there was a big data link. So having restrictions on re-anonymizing data, I think would also be key. So federal preemption, strong federal preemption, so we can have one dealing with the private right of action in a way that makes sense and giving states the ability to enforce, and dealing with the anonymized data and the re-anonymization of data.
Great. So if anyone has questions, if you want to just raise your hand, we'll run out a mic to you.
So we talked a lot about teens and tweens privacy, and that oftentimes when we hear this debate discusses children privacy, we're actually talking about much older children or teenagers. How do you balance the trade-offs between the fact that we have children or teenagers in this range that are trying to seek information that they may not want their parents to know about, with also ensuring that there is parental choice and that parents are well educated around the tools that are available to them?
So you all may have other feelings, but I think in our bill we tried to balance that. I mean, we raised the age to 16, which I think for companies, they told us that would be easier in terms of compliance with existing regimes like GDPR, but at the same time, the parental controls are there by default, but can be turned off. I think that that's important, that the parents and the kids be able to work together to be able to say, hey, I'm mature enough, right? When I was a kid, frankly, my parents would never have deigned to put controls onto me, right? But, to be able to say, okay, I don't need my profile set to private. I don't need to have this particular control in place, right? Or the parent can just kind of do that knowing that their kid is mature enough, right? And I would also say, right, that certainly our intent is not to apply to sites like, for example, Wikipedia, right? I mean, if that's how you all read it, I'm happy to clarify that that's not the case, but certainly it's not meant to apply to like general usage research type sites where kids should be able to go and research and look up other things that are sort of outside of this is a child intended site.
Great question, and that's always the balance as a parent, right? When do you track your kids when they're driving, or the first time they're riding a bike and go in the neighborhood, it's scary to let go, and the first time they go to school, and do you follow them to school? That's the age-old question of being a parent, of those balancing, and so having the tools that are set on helps in that, because parents, what I hear in my online, the child safety groups, is parents don't know how to turn the tools on. They're very complicated and they're unsure what to do. And we always hear this refrain that my kids know more than I do about the technology. And they've been saying that for 20 years. And now the people who are saying it are the kids who are now adults and have kids. And so I think there's that balancing. There are tools out there like SafetyNet and others who have looked at that. I would highly recommend you look at those. I have no financial interest in SafetyNet, but they're a UK entity and they try to balance that where the privacy versus notifying parents when there's maybe cyberbullying. I think there's Bark is another one that is out there that has some of these tools. So there's tools out there, but I am working on the Earn It Act. And one of the things that was very disappointing when Apple flip-flopped on their announcement, what bothered me is that they were saying parents don't have a right to know when their teenagers have nude pictures and CSAM going across their phones. I think that's an easy one. Yes, as a parent, if it's CSAM, which is illegal, I think I should know as a parent. And I was disappointed that Apple decided to flip on that with some pressure. But other issues of research and Wikipedia and finding other information of your own sexuality and things like that, I think, again, that's where parents need to trust their kids and have some latitude in doing so.
So you've hit on a critical issue, which also fed into what I was saying about, the battling controls, and it's one of the reasons that Congress, with the FTC's input, originally did the under 13, although sometimes I joke it's just about, that was bar mitzvah age and that somebody just chose it for that. I think the balance between parents and their children isn't really solvable in legislation. The idea is that you give parents the tools that they have in other contexts, but not so much online. But you can't solve for the parents' relationship with their children, how parents supervise the minors, and some of that is just going to have to be worked out on an individual family level. We can't solve for that perfectly in legislation.
Yeah, and I just also say that I think that tension is something that a lot of industry has exploited for a long time in order to prevent being regulated. So that would just be, and I think it's, from my perspective, it's kind of worn out. I mean, if you look at, I think on the one hand, we have a bill, the Informed Consumers, that passed the House as part of the Competes Act, and that would require verification of third-party sellers on marketplaces, as well as disclosure when they hit certain level to sellers. We think that's a perfectly appropriate and correct thing to do to make a safer internet. At the same time, we can be supportive of anonymizing children's data, raising the age, and all of that. And those are not in conflict, despite a constant refrain that they are on the part of industry.
So we've come up on time. This has been a great panel. Just to put a couple fine points on some of what we've heard, there was certainly a lot of urgency from the panel around need for comprehensive privacy legislation, including greater protection for children. We heard about some of the trade-offs around notice and choice in that model, as well as around a parental control model. So thank you all for joining us, and thanks so much to our panelists for all their terrific thoughts today.